Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're encountering this. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. America, the world, and all the ships at sea, to borrow a Walter Winchell-ism. This is Drawing Me Out with Bill Willingham. I will continue to be Bill Willingham because, frankly, we can't find anyone else willing to do it. And so that means Brad has to stay Brad. Say hello, Brad.
Yep. Hey, what's going on, everybody?
Everybody answered with a cacophony of different things. I can't repeat them all.
Couldn't pick them
Some of
out,
them
right?
I will never admit to. Anyway, today's subject, we're talking about writing, some of the how-tos. We're trying to swing this set of videos a little farther into the stuff that's useful for you area of the video spectrum. But first, let's do a little bragging. We're in the double digits of episodes now, and we're in the triple digits of subscribers. Double digits of episodes is great. Triple digits of subscribers is pretty good. It could be better. So I guess this is the part you knew it was coming, where one begs you to consider subscribing to our podcast. If we get to 1,000, and we're only about 900 and change away now, um, apparently then we become famous and we can introduce ourselves as influencers and such, and then I get to go to the good parties with the beautiful people. Of course, we don't do good parties with beautiful people anymore because we're all staying home.
And hopefully everybody is staying home and staying safe right now.
Um, I was once invited, and Brad was going to go with me, once invited to the wrap party for the Battlestar Galactica series. We were in Vegas at the time, and the wrap party was just a 2-hour drive away in LA. And I found out what I was made of because even though I really did want to go hang out with the Battlestar Galactica people, and Brad did and all that, Brad was and continues to be hungry for LA fame. But we were also getting old. We were old, and it's like, that's a long drive. We'd have to get a hotel. We'd have to, but after the long drive, then we'd have the parties. So we'd have to stay up for the. Anyway, we talked ourselves out of it. I don't think either of us are really, really cut out to be with the beautiful people and the good parties.
That was more than a decade or so ago, and we were already old men then.
Mm-hmm. In any case, today's episode, we're talking about writing, still, writing advice that is useful to you. We talked last time about where do you get your ideas. You're all good on that. You all know how to get ideas now. And now we're going to talk about how all of those ideas are worthless in the sense that ideas are cheap, execution is everything. Any idea that you sit on is going to be someone else's idea. Only ideas that you execute into stories are of any use. So let's talk about execution. The first rule of executing these videos is I'm not a good teacher. In fact, I'm a terrible teacher. I found this out in many venues. I'm not really good. So you're not going to get a comprehensive, in this video, in last week's video, or anything that's preceded or will follow, you will not get a comprehensive accounting of everything you need to know to write, to draw, to break into comics, any of that. What you're going to get is some anecdotes of this is what I believe, this is what worked for me, this is what didn't work for me, or, this is something that I find helpful. That's it. Hopefully, that's going to be of enough value to be worth staying with us for a while. Brad, what
Yeah.
do you have to say about executing ideas?
I had many, many moons ago the belief that I might actually try writing. And to this day, I still have many notes from my old stories, and not a single one of them ever got executed. And one of them is remarkably similar to Star Trek The Next Generation. So it's like your Jurassic Park story. It's like, yeah, you could do this with this group of people and this type of character. And well, you could, or someone else could if you just sit there.
as we discussed, the ideas are cheap in the sense that everyone gets a bunch of them. Part of the skill set of being a writer is first writing down those ideas in a place that you can access them again. Don't just assume you're going to remember them. Write them down. I have ideas notebooks. I have a notebook just for good character names and lots of ideas, lots of little, uh, sometimes even a turn of phrase. It's like, this is a good turn of phrase. I better write it down or I'll forget it. So the first rule of execution, I know I already said the first rule was I'm not a good teacher, but the first rule of the actual lesson, the first rule of execution is write it down. Write it down in a place you can find it. I had an idea for Star Trek, speaking of Star Trek, Brad, way back in the day, that they should get away from the big ships of the Federation doing the exploring for a bit. Like, just try and go a different way. And so in Star Trek, they were always running into traders and merchants and stuff of questionable character.
Cyrano Jones. Yep.
Cyrano Jones, rogues, space rogues, which you're never, ever going to run out of a desire for a good space rogue. That's a meal that is good every time you eat it, just like a good revenge story. So I thought, okay, a smaller ship, not Federation, but there's a Federation plant in it, because one of the things is that the client that hires them is actually secretly Starfleet intelligence, using the trading ship as a cover for getting around and going into skullduggery places. The idea was Star Trek, Free Trader, and it's going to be a small ship of a iconoclastic, interesting crew of ne'er-do-wells. And I sat on that. I didn't. Now, the problem there is trying to find a way into the Star Trek shop. I had many venues to get into the Star Trek shop, as in, come write for us, but they involved befriending people that are just not my people. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but more of just, one person's cup of tea is not another's. The kind of people that would lecture you on things. At a convention once, I was interrupted by one of the more popular writers of Star Trek paperbacks, who just blasted in on a conversation, an important business conversation, to say she was mad that every single one of the original crew, Shatner, James Doohan, et cetera, they all owe it to us to film a death scene, an important death scene right now, because they're all getting older. They're all going to die soon. You need an important death scene so that at some point that can be shown in one of the movies. And then hit and run, she was off. I go, oh my God, these are the connections I'm making to get into, the Star Trek community. So I didn't follow up. I didn't follow up on Star Trek Free Trader. And along comes the wondrous show Firefly, which is, it was exactly, that was like, that's it, except for the plant from the Federation, which in their case, they kind of hinted that there may have been, what I mean, a couple of times Jane did sell them out to the Federation. But not for keepsies.
Right.
But it was so much. That was it. That was the show. And I'm going, oh my God, I should have tried harder, because I had that idea 10 years prior. It's like, anyone who has a 10-year head start and doesn't even try to get it done, you got no one but yourself to blame. So that was a failure. That was a good idea, but that idea belonged to anyone who had it, and I failed in the execution phase. Speaking of Star Trek, and it's not always a bad thing. I think Firefly was so much better a series than I could have generated anyway. Good for them. And then, of course, the powers that be had this wondrous thing, and then did everything they could to destroy and trample all over it, and we got the truncated one season that we got.
One season
Anyway,
out of order,
out of
moved
order. Oh my
overnights.
God.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they thought that was a secret to success, since the Star Trek series started by putting them out of order.
Oh, right.
Yeah, not many people remember that. The very first episode of Star Trek was the one with the salt-sucking monster, and it was good, but some of the other ones would have set it up, I think, a little bit better. In any case, that is just another bit of evidence that only execution counts. Only the things you do count. It doesn't always guarantee success. I spent a long time working on a novel that I finished, and is sitting in my drawer, my metaphorical drawer, since it's on my computer now, because it turns out the entire premise of it ripped off a Stephen King book without my knowing it. I hadn't read this one, and I found out after the fact, and it's like, this was not a small detail that I could redo. It was a huge detail that, like, oh my God, that's the entire thing. And I ended up, I'm not going to say why, because I think I can still save the book by changing some things. I ended up plagiarizing Stephen King. That you don't get away with. You don't come out with that book. And this was a novel that was in the process of my agent getting it into, publication or whatever.
Oh,
No
wow.
one said, "Did you know that?" Anyway, someone would have pointed out after the fact, and what a fool I would have been. So execution doesn't guarantee. If someone gets there first, they get there first. If someone gets there first and you can do it better, that's fine. But I am not that cocky that says, yeah, I did a better job than that Stephen King fellow. That might be good someday. Yeah, that just wasn't going to happen. So, but there's a good deal of Victor Frankenstein in me, and I think I can break this thing down for parts and reassemble it into something that works without the major premise of the novel. Execution, you got to do the work. That's really the only part of this video, the only lesson, the only rule. You have to do it. And the only way to do it is to sit down and do it. Talking about the story you're going to do someday isn't writing. Planning, even copious note taking, if the notes are an excuse to not get started. None of that is really writing. Writing is writing. On one of the World Fantasy conventions I went to, there was this cute as a bug girl, if you like bugs, that was going around with this 3-ring binder of pages of all the things that are going to be in this wonderful book she's going to write someday. And the pages were, this is pictures of my cat because my cat's going to be a character in this. And this is, pictures torn out of catalogs. This is the main character. This is the female protagonist, et cetera, et cetera. Everything, like menus. This is the meals that are going to have in chapter. I'm serious. And everything except the actual story. And I saw her like the next year still doing it and still trapping guys. She was so cute that people were willing to listen on end until they realized that, oh my God, she's not going to let me go until we've gone through every page of this book, of this, and this one of those huge 3-ring binders, the really, really big kind. And the look of despair on their face as I come out of a panel where she had him trapped when I went in, and she still has him backed into that corner an hour later. That's not writing. That is not executing your idea. That is playing with your ideas as an excuse not to work. And the only way to do this, and I know you've heard this from everyone else, you sit down and you write. I can't get started. Okay, if you can't get started, the whole white page syndrome. Write down things that you would be talking about if you could write. That's the best antidote for overcoming writer's block that there is. It's like, yeah, just jot down the stuff that if you could write today, this is what you'd be writing. And then those unrelated, notes and ideas that you just jotted down, take this part and this part, and now what would fill those in? Okay, fill that in, and then fill that in. Work on that. Keep your ass in your seat. Pretty soon you're writing. I mean, that's writing. You have
It
to
sounds like
write.
it's that whole eating an elephant thing. How are you going to eat an elephant? And that's, one bite at a time.
Yeah, you start. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That's the stentorian philosophical cliched version, but it
Right.
is all absolutely true. You have to do it. The other thing in execution, another rule that is sort of related to you got to execute, is have a story to tell. Don't waste your reader's time. As a matter of fact, the only consensus that a lot of very good writers could get on what makes a good novel versus, I think they were talking about novels, versus a bad one. They had lots of different and varying rules and examples and templates that they would consider. The one thing they generally agreed on is good writing, a good story, a good novel is one wherein the reader will keep reading, keep turning pages, and at the end of it doesn't feel like you've wasted their time. That's it. There's a lot of room in there for lots of types of stories, but don't waste anyone's time. Writing, any kind of storytelling, movies, books, whatever, is basically the equivalent of you jumping up on stage in front of a bunch of people and say, I want you to give me all of your attention for as long as I want it. And in return, I will make you glad you did. That takes a certain amount of arrogance. And the people that are very good at it are also, absolutely fearful of this and introverts and afraid of the act of getting on stage. I mean, every comedian that's now a wonderful storyteller is sometimes crippled by the fright of that, because what you're doing is exactly that. You're saying, I want your attention totally, and I'm going to tell you when you can have your attention back. And you will thank me for it. You will think that this was worth doing. That is an absolutely bold thing to do. So I understand the fear of not doing it. But if you're going to do it, please, God, please have a story in mind. Howie Mandel, who is now a host on America's Got Talent, actor, comedian, used to do in his early stand-up. He would do the old saw, which is the comedian of great confidence, would show that he could make a joke out of anything, and he'd do the, okay, give me a person, male or female, give me a profession, give me a location, and the audience would shout these out, and he's going to get some funny anecdote out of things that he just gets for the first time from the audience. And he used to do this, and it's like, okay, what's this leading up to? What's this leading up to? And then the joke, the punchline was, okay, now give me something really funny to say. It killed. Of course, it's a hilarious
Right.
thing to do, but it really illustrates the fact that if you get up there, you must have a story for them. The nonsense, like the final episode of Sopranos, where they just went to black, and it's like, well, you should fill in your own story. You should decide how it comes out. It's like, look, my head is full of my own stories. I decide how things come out in my stories all the time. I like getting paid for that. Where's my check, Mr. Sopranos guy? If I'm writing the end, where's my check? If you have a story to tell, tell me a story. Tell me a story that you've worked out and that you're confident in. Don't expect me to do your work for you. So execute, have an actual story in mind, and get it done. And then you can be a storyteller. You can be a writer, whatever. That's how to break in, how to get someone interested in it. Don't be that girl with the binder that just knocks some guy into a corner and bludgeons them with all of your droning ideas. The only proof is in the pudding. Be the writer, finish stuff, then worry about shopping it around. At some point, I think we'll talk about shopping it around. I'm
Okay.
not as good at that as others, so maybe we'll fly an expert in. But that is it. Execution is everything. Ideas are wonderful. Good ideas are valuable if you if you capitalize on them, unused ideas are worthless. They are paper Confederate currency that was worth nothing at the end of the war, because if they'd won, Confederate currency would be worth zillions. So the only way to make your currency of ideas worth something is to win the war. The war being finish your book, finish your screenplay, make your movie, tell your story, get up on the stage, tell it, go away, you're done.
Well, on
And
the
we're done.
subject of finishing, yeah, I was going to say, I think that's a good place to wrap it for this time.
Okay, then. Hopefully this has been of value to you.
Thanks again so much for hanging in with us for those double-digit episodes, and keep watching and sharing and subscribing and liking, and we'll keep making.
Please do subscribe, or feel free, since I'm full of hot air, to tell me why in the comments down below.
Awesome. All right,
Awesome.
that'll be it for this time, gang, and we'll see you
All right.
see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We are rolling.